after taking a week off. Our first item is approval of the minutes, which I guess we don't have enough to vote, so we won't vote. We'll get back to that. Remind me, if you would, please, to get back to the approval of the minutes. But you should have been emailed the minutes for January 29, 30, 31, and February 1st. So when we get a quorum, then we will talk, and probably we'll just wait until the end of the committee meeting to look at approval of minutes. But the first item up, or the next item up, will be a hearing on House Bill 2477. So I will open up the hearing on House Bill 2477, and we will start with a briefing from our reviser. Reviser Lawrence, welcome to the committee. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to lay on us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. House Bill 2477 would amend two statutes that are part of the Agricultural Remediation Program. The program provides reimbursement for the costs of agricultural remediation. First, the bill would increase the maximum reimbursement from the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Fund for an eligible person for a site from $200,000, as it currently sits, to $300,000, unless the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board sets forth a different maximum through rules and regulations, and that maximum could be less than or equal to the $300,000. Additionally, the bill would increase the total reimbursable amount from $400,000 to $600,000 for property that has been sold or leased, and both parties to the sale or lease are responsible for the remediation. Again, unless the Agricultural Remediation Board sets forth a different maximum in rules and regulations that is less than or equal to $600,000. Finally, the bill would increase the administrative expenditure limit for the Agricultural Remediation Board from its current $150,000 to $175,000. The bill did pass the House without any changes on a vote of 110 to 1, and it would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, do you have questions of Advisor Lawrence? Seeing none, thank you. We will move on to conferees. Our first proponent this morning is Mr. Randy Stuckey, Senior Vice President, General, I don't know why that word is hard to say, counsel for the, well, we've got acronyms, but I will let Mr. Stuckey tell us what those acronyms stand for. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. Randy Stuckey this morning on behalf of the Kansas Grain and Feed Association and the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, KGFA and KARA. And this bill, House Bill 2477, or 2744, rather, 2477, it's early this morning. We did actually, the two associations that I just mentioned, who I work for, did bring this bill and requested to be introduced into the House this year. It did, as Ms. Lawrence just went over, it's a very simple bill, but I want to give you a little bit on what this program does, the remediation fund and program, so you have some awareness of the importance of this fund program and who pays into it. So in 2000, the legislature passed the Remediation Act, the Ag Chemical Remediation Act, essentially for one reason, but it was extended for a few more. And then that first reason was grain fumigants that had been used decades previously to the bill being passed. That was carbon tetrachloride grain fumigant used throughout the Midwest. And that fumigant did a great job, but if you use too much, it would percolate not just through the grain as a liquid, but then into the soil and maybe potentially groundwater beneath the soil in the state. And this occurred all throughout the Midwest. Kansas and a couple of other states in the Midwest were the sole states then to say, what can we do to clean up this grain fumigant that's in our soil and groundwater? And so in 2000, the legislature came together in agreement with both the grain elevator industry and the ag retail industry in the state of Kansas. And they said, well, let's use industry funds, not state general funds. Let's be clear about that. There are no state general funds that go into this program. These are fees that are tacked on to license fees, grain warehouse fees, dealer fees, product registration fees that are otherwise paid by the industry. There's an additional fee then that is tacked on to those fees that funds this fund and program, and essentially it works as a form of a self-insurance fund, because you don't know if your property or the property that you're about to buy, if through consolidation in the industry, happens to be a property that has these grain fumigant chemicals in the groundwater or soil on your facility, or as defined in the Ag Chemical Act, fertilizer products, nitrate fertilizers, others. And so those are the chemicals that we find in the properties let's be clear, these aren't active spills generally. These are legacy products that we find in the groundwater and soil below the facilities from legacy activities, loading a fertilizer truck without a load pad. That doesn't occur today, but it may have occurred 40 years ago and likely did, and that's how we have the situation that we have today. A little bit of fertilizer over a long period of time accumulates. And so it is this fund, it is this program, as a self-insurance fund funded by the industry. We herald this program in our state and in our industry, unique to Kansas and just a couple of other states, because we are able through this program to take care of those chemicals that otherwise would be on the shoulders of the landowners, the property owners at these facilities to clean up, to remediate. And the purpose of the bill today speaks to the fact that these are very expensive projects. When you need to wholesale remove, large swaths of soil, say 100 yards by 10 feet deep, you pull that out, it's full of rich nitrates, fertilizer that can be land applied at agronomic rates on ag lands, so it doesn't create a hot zone. You remove that soil. That's a very expensive project. We're talking about trucks coming in, excavators, pulling that soil out, bringing in clean soil, remediating the project. These projects can be around $500,000 at times. The cap that's set forth for the reimbursement rate for these projects in statute today, and has existed since it was passage in 2000, is $200,000, which was great in 2000. My home is appraised at $100,000 more than, or $150 maybe more now than did 3 years ago. This is the world that we're living in. These reimbursement rates we've seen at the same time, the inflation just has not kept up. And so what the bill is requesting is a reasonable increase on those reimbursement caps from $200,000 per project, which is a project at a site, currently $200,000. The increase requested is $100,000 for a $300,000 max. And so that is the bill, Mr. Chairman. $300,000 wasn't calculated as what is the inflation rate since 2000, but we think it is a reasonable and probably a limited reasonable increase when looking at the size of the programs that are presented to the Agri-Remediation Board today. And I think with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions the committee might have.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Randy. How many elevators per year approximately use this?
Very good, Mr. Chairman. So the program runs through about $1 million a year in and out. That's about the size of the fund, and currently the fund sits at probably about $1.5 million. There's another board meeting coming up where they'll pay out some more applications. But generally, the board will see about 45 to 55 applications per year, so one application per site. And they don't generally complete the entire project and then submit a $300,000 or $200,000 application. Generally, they can only continue the next phase of the application, or the project site rather, because they have submitted an application, received that reimbursement, and now they have the cash on hand to do the next phase.
Thank you for that. And where is the contaminated soil taken to? When you're scraping it up and they're bringing in new dirt, or does it scrape dirt?
So like I said, for nitrate fertilizer, yes, we don't have heavy metals or other things that toxic like that. KDHE might not appreciate me saying this, but the maxim is that the solution to pollution is dilution, right? It's only toxic in a condensed area. And so you certainly can apply nitrate hot soil at agronomic rates to ag land. So that's where the nitrate hot soil can go.
So it's going on a field.
Exactly.
Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Stuckey, Senior Vice President. Thank you for your presentation. Couple questions. What is the balance in this fund right now?
So it accumulates continuously as new license and registration fees are paid into the fund.
Yeah.
So it's not static. Following the last board meeting in December, I believe the balance was about $1 million. So likely now it's probably sitting around 1.25 to 1.3 million dollars. 2 years ago, or 2019, I believe, the act was amended to put a $3 million maximum cap on the fund. So at no time can the fund have more than $3 million in it. At that time, KDA would shut off it's actually April 1, I believe, of any given year. If the $3 million, if the maximum is at or above $3 million, the fees would shut off. And until that it reaches $1 million the next April 1st around, and KDA would look at it, the fees could be turned back on at that point. So there is a $3 million maximum cap, and I believe we're sitting at about 1.25, 1.3 right now.
How often has the cap been bumped under the current deal? I mean, at 200,000, 400,000, how often has that been bumped?
Yeah, so it's been $200,000. It's current maximum since the inception of the program.
Yeah, but how often has somebody come in and asked for 200 when it's going to cost 500?
Okay. We have seen, I think there's probably 15 to 20 sites that have maxed out. So like I said, we won't see an immediate, likely, unless there's a $100,000 application that comes in, we won't see an immediate increase in the size of the fund because we're not constantly hitting into that $200,000. But for the larger projects, we do see those and fairly routinely. And that's when you have those $100,000 applications of somebody who had the land equipment come in and they had the soil removed, trucked off, and then new soil come back in. You'll see very large invoices for some of those projects.
So when it talks about the 200,000 for an eligible person, let's say the eligible person owns 4 or 5 different properties, and he's got this problem on 3 or 4 of them. Does he have it per property or is it per individual?
So very good. It's both the applicant and the project site. So the $200,000 is per project site. So each project site has its own number assigned by the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And each of these projects have to go through one of 2 programs through the state, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The projects are reviewed and approved by or at the direction of the State Department of Health and Environment. And so each of the project sites, and you would only have one per location, would have their own maximum. And that's a good policy to have because we want to encourage, these people are money out of pocket in cleaning up these properties. We want to encourage these projects to continue.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stuckey, for being here. So, first of all, I'm trying to understand the limit of 300,000. I'm reading that it's 80% of the total eligible actions greater than 100,000 and less than or equal to 300,000. So if it was 80%, if the cost were 300,000, then the reimbursement would be 240?
So, right. I wasn't a part of the original drafting of this bill in 2000. Had I been, I would have asked for that language not to be included. It has been, it's frustrated the carrying out of, in practical application, this fund. But you're exactly right. As it exists in the act and as it was originally passed, the project costs in any application are reimbursable 90% at the first $100,000 of submitted costs. And so the applicant would submit, say, $100,000, easy math, and should the board approve all of what was submitted, all $100,000, then they're reimbursed $90,000 of that first $100,000. And then after the payout, once the applicant has received $100,000 actual monies, then the reimbursement rate is $80,000. And so it's kind of a two-step dance on how do you reimburse these applicants, and it takes a lot of time and energy to track all that. But you're right. When you increase then to the $300,000, each application that is reimbursed after the applicant has received its first $100,000 would be reimbursed at 80% until such time as the applicant has received its maximum reimbursement of $300,000. So it takes a lot of time and energy to track all that.
Thank you. I'm still trying to understand, if you only get 80% of the maximum of 300,000, then is that this new language that says except that the remediation board set forth a different amount than is less than or equal to 300,000? So you're saying even though it says 80%, we can reimburse you at 300,000?
So two different ideas. One is what is actually reimbursed, and then the other idea is the rate of reimbursement for the approved expense. So you have the approved expense reduced by the 90 or 80% up to, then paid out up to $100,000 and $300,000. So it's the expenses that are submitted and approved, and then the reimbursement is either 90 or 80% of that amount paid up to, and then step over, paid up to that $300,000. And so it's two different ideas. It was wonky drafting, but we live with it.
I'm still having a little trouble understanding that. But so I'm saying, so you're saying that the remediation board may, pursuant to rules and regs, set forward a different amount. And does that amount have to be a percentage, or could they say, we've decided that we should reimburse the whole amount of the costs of the remediation project?
So I don't know, Tamara, if you want to weigh in on the language, but it is intended to be drafted that the board can set the maximum reimbursement rate, not the rate of reimbursement for the approved expenses. I believe that's how it's set forth in the bill.
I will talk more with you and the revisor. The other question I had, and because I'm always looking for how I can get around what's here, and so I've had, find out that I have a really expensive project on my property, so I think I'll sell it to my daughter, and then she can qualify for up to, I guess, 80% of 300,000, and I can qualify for up to 80% of 300,000. So why don't you just make it 600,000 for everybody?
Sharon? Well, we've not seen mothers and daughters selling properties to each other. But what we do have, and what the bill allows for, and the law today allows for, is two parties to retain a liability for the property, both the buyer and the seller. And then if they come out of pocket for $600,000 for KDHE approved project costs to clean up the site, then yes, those project costs can be reimbursed up to the maximum out of pocket. But only if both buyer and seller maintain liability to clean up the site. If liability is handed off to your daughter or the buyer, they are maxed out at the maximum reimbursement rate under the law as it is today. What you have received is transferred over to the buyer of the property.
Well, it wouldn't be in my interest when I was writing the contract for sale to transfer the liability if the idea was to get up to 600,000. So I'm wondering why is there a difference when both the buyer and seller are liable?
Yeah, good question. Again, this was carryover from the original bill. It was, as it was passed 24 years ago, and I was not involved in those conversations, but it is what it is. It's not been utilized. I don't recall ever where that's been utilized, where you've actually, both the seller and the buyer maintain liability for the project in order to receive the total reimbursement of $600,000, again, for KDHE approved actual cost for reimbursement. But if a project happens to have $600,000, if the bill's passed, or $400,000 today of actual project costs to clean up a site, and there's an agreement between both parties and KDHE who assigns liability or finds liability for a project site, then that's what the law allows for $400,000 of reimbursement of project costs. We want to encourage cleanup of properties to their fullest extent. You can't just get $400,000 out of pocket if there's no project cost to reimburse.
I absolutely understand that we want to get these cleaned up, but I'm just wondering why, if there's a buyer and a seller, they are, can get more money than if it's an individual that has that same, a single liability. So we're rewriting this law, and I'm going to see if we can do it as best as possible.
Mr. Stuckey, you indicated that there would be 90% of the first $100,000. There is $1,000, and I'm going to use in the insurance terms deductible, because it has to exceed $1,000 before they receive anything. They receive 90% above $1,000, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I just thought I would mention that, not a big thing, but It is that there is that $1,000 that's the first responsibility of the person remediating.
That's correct.
How expensive can remediation be? Can it be significantly more than these dollar amounts?
Quite a bit. So yeah, certainly in the last handful of years, the engineer costs themselves, the consultant fees, they range $400 an hour. So you can imagine just on the consultation and putting the project together, working with the State Department of Health and Environment on putting a plan together before even one shovel of ground is turned, you can have $50,000 of fees quite easily. But once you begin to actually move dirt, move soil, move the soil away from the project or move it back, we've seen projects that get cut off at $200,000, but we've spoken with the consultant themselves and with the Department of Health and Environment, and they're well over $400,000.
So the next question would be, why did you stop at $300,000? When you look at what the purchasing power of $200,000 was in 2000 when this original legislation passed versus now, the same purchasing power is $360,000 versus $300,000. So is there a reason you can give the committee why you stopped at 3 and 6? And I know that's a, if you will, 50% increase, but purchasing power or real dollars, that you're not even covering inflation.
Sure. So, fair question. This was as you mentioned, a substantial increase, and one that both the ag retail industry and the grain elevator industry was comfortable with as the folks that actually pay into the program. Now, any one elevator or ag facility, as they go to consolidate or purchase another person's property, you'll do the phase 1, phase 2 study. You don't know if that's going to be something you'll have to contend with. You also don't know if potentially if you're sitting on a legacy, hot zone for different reasons. So it's both sides. It's what the industry believed was a fair adjustment to the fund. At the same time, they think that's reasonable because you don't know if you're going to be caught up in a project yourself. So it's a large increase, $100,000 ask, and one that the industry was comfortable with.
One reason I ask that, Mr. Stuckey, is because if we're already not getting up to an inflation rate, is the industry going to be back in a couple, 3 years asking for another bump? I guess my question would be, I know you've already indicated why you've chosen those numbers, but would it not be better if they were established at a little higher? And then I will ask the department about how the fund could stand if it was put at a little higher reimbursement rate. So, and you may not have an opinion on it because you've already supported the bill. You said that it was simple, went through the House. This is the Senate.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's from $200,000 to $300,000. That's a very large increase. Not all projects are going to, the majority of projects probably won't hit that cap, not until they're, over a number of years. But there are some that get caught up in much more than that. The industry's position is that, at that $300,000 level, you'll cover the majority of the projects.
I got that. One last question from the chair. I noticed that you strike the 5-year period because currently in the statute, it's 200,000 within a 5-year period.
Right.
And then it's also the 400,000 within a 5-year period. But you are striking the 5-year period. So does that mean that it could be drawn out longer, or it could be more money in a shorter amount of time? How would you interpret that?
So what had happened was the board, in the current statutory language, allows the board to pass a regulation to set a different, to pay the money out in a different manner. And so because that 5-year rolling boulder essentially of $200,000 maximum, it's not static, it's every 5 years you have to recalculate that. It turned out to be an administrative headache. And so what the board did under its authority and regulation was just set a $200,000 maximum total and just set aside that 5-year rolling boulder. And because that's not the practice of the board today, there's a regulation that says that we're not going to do that. This bill would strike out that language to make it cleaner. The board will go in later then and amend the regulation to just remove that provision altogether. So you're not going to have that 5-year rolling average or rolling total.
All right, so this is not for you, Mr. Stuckey, but for the committee, a case where the legislature set a 5-year, but they also gave authority for something to be different. So in statute, I believe that we should establish a time period, not necessarily in this bill, but in the future, rather than just saying, well, we think it should be this, but if the department thinks something different, we're going to give them. Additional question? Sure. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Randy, if it was negligence that caused this pollution, is they liable for that? I mean, we're not going to spend state money on negligent by the co-op, them being negligent.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, this isn't state money at all. This is
I understand.
entirely industry funds.
Yeah.
So, and then and separately, so negligence, right? There's a civil liability issue for negligence. If the contaminant moves off site, then they will could be held liable for any trespass of that chemical. So that's the negligence piece on a civil manner. And then, but garden variety of these projects, what are they? What do we see? This was just, we'll say for the grain fumigant, it was just a product that was applied. There was too much applied. It didn't fumigate the liquid form of the fumigant product. It percolated. And so it wasn't negligence. It was just, it didn't work out the way that they thought it was supposed to. And then for the fertilizer, if, I don't know that would be negligence either, but a different type of housekeeping than we practice today, where all mixing and loading has to occur on a concrete loading pad. That wasn't always the case. And so, just a little bit of solid or liquid fertilizer every day over a long period of time,
More about like a pesticide that you put into a bin, for, an elevator bin.
Sure.
And it falls off the truck, for example, and you have a concentration right there in the middle of their yard, right by in the elevator, on the ground on the elevator. I'm talking about something just bad happens. I'm not talking about over a period of time. I'm talking about a bucket full, a barrel. Look, that stuff's nasty. It'll kill you.
So, exactly. So that would be an insurable event. Like all these folks have liability insurance for their facilities. If it's an insurable event, it's not covered by this fund. These are uninsurable events. This is a self-insurance fund for that purpose, for the industry, for legacy spills of non-insurable events.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Randy. How many potential sites known sites do we have? You said there are 40 to 45 applications a year, and how many of those applications are reimbursed, approved, whatever?
Well, I would hazard to say that almost all of the applications that are submitted are reimbursed to some extent. The board will go through and, based upon the law and regulations, pull out some invoices that don't qualify for whatever reason. But the applicants generally know what the fund is, what qualifies. The projects are funneled through by the direction of or under the approval of the Department of Health and Environment. So that's the precursory step before they even get to the board. And also the consultants that these folks work with understand the program and work with KDHE to make sure that what the projects are being, the steps that are being taken are going to be reimbursable. The number of projects that are sitting out there, I would say probably active sites. You never know if somebody else is going to start an active site again, but probably 60 sites, I would think, 40 to 60 sites. And we ask KDHE often, because they have to go through that agency, what is the position of the program? Is there high demand on this program? Because they'll know, the pipeline of applications. It starts with them when there's a complaint or they discover contaminant in the soil or groundwater. They're going to know first. And they inform these people, hey, there's a fund out there as well. So they have a better view of what that projection might look like on future applicants.
Mr. Stuckey, I think we've, do you have? No, we have not exhausted our time. Very good. Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stuckey, this will be an easy one. Is the Kansas Agriculture Remediation Board, is that appointed or elected?
So that is appointed by the governor, and it's 5 volunteer positions, and then 1 each of ex officio for KDA and KDHE. But both the grain elevator industry and the ag retailers, they'll submit letters of recommendation from folks within the industry for each of the appointed seats. And each of the 5 seats that are on the board are specific to one of the parts of the industry that pay fees into the fund. So it's not just anybody out there. There's an ag producer seat, so a farmer. There's a grain elevator seat. There's an ag retailer seat, ag manufacturer, a wholesaler seat, and there's one more.
A follow-up question to that, do we have guardrails in place so that we don't need to be working on remediation in the future for that kind of thing?
We certainly do. That's a great question. As I mentioned, almost all of these projects are legacy projects from this was something that occurred decades ago. And when I was with the State Department of Agriculture back in the early 2000s, we had at that time, based upon regulation sets that had been passed by EPA, adopted a large swath of regulations in the state of Kansas to say this is how you use and store and mix and load fertilizers. That grain fumigant that we talked about is no longer a product that's used in the state of Kansas or throughout the Midwest. But we still have to deal with things that happened many years ago on these properties, and that's why it's still a good project, or program, rather, going forward.
Now I think we have exhausted our questions of you, Mr. Stuckey. We appreciate you being willing to be the first up, so you fielded the most difficult questions, maybe. But
Well, thank you for your time, and we do appreciate the bill being heard today. And if there needs to be some amendments to the language, we'd want to work out with you guys on that as well. So thank you very much.
Committee, our next conferee is Joshua McGinn, who is the Assistant Secretary for the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Mr. McGinn, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Josh McGinn. I'm here representing the Department of Agriculture. We just wanted to be here today. Our testimony is very short. This is a good funding partnership that we work on with the industry As Mr. Stuckey said, this is fully supported by the industry with their money. And to just to reiterate, this is mostly just an inflation adjustment since 2001 when this program was first introduced. It was renewed in 2019 until 2030. Mr. Stuckey mentioned that I think, well, 2 years later, it was capped at $3 million. So I do want to respond to the chairman's question about when it comes to whether this is the right amount or not. We defer to the industry partly because there is a balance between that $3 million cap, how much the industry is currently charged in fees. And we both don't want to get in a situation where the fees, get turned on and shut off and create some uncertainty in the industry, and we want to get this money out the door so that we can remediate these sites and help the industry to do that. So with that, there's also a slight increase in the administrative fees from 150 to 175. But overall, we appreciate the work that the board did on this. As you just discussed, the board has members represented from every entity that pays into this fund, and KDA serves on the board as well. So happy to stand for any questions, but for the most part, we appreciate the industry for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGinn. Do you think there are appropriate committees, standing committees, to receive these reports? Because the bill was written some time ago, it refers to sending the reports to the Senate Standing Committee on Energy and Natural Resources.
Good question, Senator. I would just mention, I believe the report is available at any point if you would like to access it, and we're happy to share that with you. Thank you.
I ask, we have often had that report in the Agriculture Committee, and that seems appropriate because this really is involving grain elevators.
You said something, Mr. McGinn, that raised a question. You said that the program was reauthorized in 2019 to end in 2030, so that sort of got to explain that if you could, please.
I should say, the sunset was extended to 2030. I believe it's been about a 10-year sunset on this program since it was first established in 2001, but is that correct? Yeah. So.
And as far as the history of the fees, have there been fee increases?
I would have to get back to you. I believe, though, at current levels, I think I am not aware of a recent.
That's fine. I won't put you on the spot. I'll just ask you if you would provide that information.
Yes,
for
sure.
As far as the history. So the administrative or overhead cost, as our revisor indicated in her notes, going from 150 to 175, is it going to cost more to administer the program just because the dollar amount goes up?
I don't think that's so much the issue there as just that the typical costs of administering the program have increased. So that is not necessarily related to the increase in the size of the projects that would be going up.
Okay. And how the 150 currently, or 175, is that come from the fees, or is that part of the department's budget?
That would be something that would come from the fees, correct. So this program funds both the remediation reimbursement program as well as other services that we provide.
And last question from the chair, at least at this point. If I'd already talked about the inflation amount, they're already way behind the inflation amount of purchasing power. If it were to be more or set closer to inflation, would that potentially, you've already indicated, would probably require some adjustments in fees, but could the fund handle something without adjustments in fees or significant adjustments in fees? Because we're told that the fund has about $1 million at the end of last year, currently $1.5 million, and it's capped at $3 million. But if we raise the amount, is it the position of the department it would probably require fee increases? I guess would be to sum it up in one simple question.
Thank you, Chairman. That would be a concern. I think it would be difficult to know exactly what kind of increased demand this program would have based off of an increase from 300,000 to 400,000 or 300 to 350. I'm not personally familiar enough to know if we have some projects that are on hold. I don't believe we do, but it's possible that with some of these larger projects, that could eventually become an issue.
Okay. Committee additional questions of Mr. McGinn? Actually, I guess it is Assistant Secretary again. All right, seeing none, thank you for appearing before the committee this morning.
Thank you.
Our next conferee as a proponent is Shahira Stafford with the Co-op Council. You need to be careful who you listen to on the side. Okay. Go ahead, Mrs. Stafford.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Shakira Stafford. I'm here representing the Kansas Caucus Council. And I won't repeat a lot of what Randy said as well as Josh, but the reason that we're here supporting this bill today is that our co-op grain elevator and agricultural members pay into this program have since its inception. I'm so sorry, thank you. And I'll answer one question you had for the Assistant Secretary. The fees were increased in 2019. And actually, I will correct that. They weren't increased, we just had a shift. So the gross amount of fees collected was the same, but we shifted some from what the grain elevators paid into the program versus what the pesticide dealers and registrants paid in, just because over the years we've seen a shift in the applicants and the cause of contamination. So that was in 2019. But we, as co-ops, we feel like this is the money that we pay ourselves into this program, and increasing that amount to reimburse for the purpose of cleaning contamination in water and soil is important to us, for the communities that we serve, and so we would just support this program. And then I believe too, another question that was raised, during COVID, we saw applications increase, and so that $100 million balance decrease. And so that's why we had a $100 million balance at that time, and why it's still consistently there currently. But we are seeing those applications come back, and we don't want there to be a balance in the fund.
I guess you're finished. You're ready for questions?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's it. Thank you.
Any questions of Mrs. Stafford? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. Your testimony doesn't refer to the increase from 400,000 to 600,000. It just talks about the 300,000. Do you think there's some middle ground between those two numbers that we could increase what an individual site could get, maybe to 400,000, and then not include the opportunity to go up to 600,000?
I would have to check with our membership and see if we have a position on that. Right now, I don't think we do. I don't think we'd have a position on that, as long as, the fund can handle it, like the chairman's spoken about. I don't think we would be concerned, but that's not an official position of the Co-op Council. I'd have to find out. Thank you.
If the dollar amount was increased and it required a fee increase, your opinion or your members, and if you don't know, maybe you can ask some of them, but because it is, as you indicated in your testimony, 100% self-funded by the agriculture industry, would they be willing for the fee to be bumped, for the dollar amount to be bumped?
Again, not an official position or answer, but I would think that we would like fees to stay the same. If we got into a position where the number of applicants was so much to where we were having a backlog in applications and we weren't able to reimburse all of the applications, I think we would be willing to consider increasing fees, but for the time being, I think we would like to keep fees the same.
I'm not surprised by that answer at all, but I did want to ask.
Yeah, thank you.
Any additional questions from Mrs. Stafford? Seeing none, thank you for appearing before the committee today. We do have written proponent testimony from Kate Gleason, the Deputy Director for Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I do notice that they are in the audience. If you read their testimony, if you have any questions of KDHE, they would be delighted to answer questions. Seeing none, that is all that we have as far as conferees on House Bill 2477. So I will close the hearing on House Bill 2477. Did you have a question, Senator Francisco?
I do have a question, and I'm not sure who it's for. Perhaps research could help us with this. I appreciate that there's that $3 million cap on the fund, and I'm wondering what happens to the fees when that $300 cap is reached. $3 million. Thank you. $3 million cap.
Revisor, can you answer that? It appeared as though, from what I think some conferee had indicated, that the fees may not be collected until the fund balance drops down. Would that be your opinion, Revisor Lawrence?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So KSA 23712 is the statute that provides for the $3 million cap. And it says once the fund equals or exceeds $3 million on April 1 of any year, the assessments imposed shall not be levied on or after that July 1 until the balance equals 1 million. And then the levies would kick back in.
That is interesting. So it gets to 3, no more fees until it drops down to 1. And I don't know, committee, if we need to consider increasing the cap. Apparently, it's not been an issue in the past. And so we'll see what the committee decides to do should the bill be worked. But again, closing the hearing on House Bill 2477, we do want to back up to approval of minutes for January the 29th, 30th, and 31st, as well as February the 1st. Those minutes were emailed to you. And so do you have questions or changes for the minutes or approval of the minutes? Moved by Senator Ware that we approve the minutes as emailed. Is there a second? Seconded by Senator Kirshen. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you. Committee, that's all that we have on our agenda.